Welcome to African Folktales by Big Marc, where timeless stories come to life. Each tale is more than just a story, it's an experience. So sit back, relax, and let the magic unfold. In the heart of a land kissed by the sun and blessed by the ancient spirits, nestled between rolling hills and fields of gold, there lay a village called Oloo. It was a place where the earth spoke in colors, where the rain sang in drums, and the trees whispered old tales to the passing wind. Life in Oloo moved slowly, like the wide river that caressed its edges, and the people lived with hearts tied to the soil, the sky, and each other. Among the dusty red paths and thatched huts, there grew a love so fierce and so pure that the village elders, in their slow nodding wisdom, often spoke of it in hushed admiration. Ruth, a girl with skin the color of rich coffee and eyes that held the sadness and joy of 1,000 songs, loved Kofi, a boy who carried the wildness of the forest in his laughter and the stubbornness of the hills in his stride. They were young. Too young, some would whisper, but in Oloo, love blossomed early, and when the gods smiled, it was foolish to turn away. Ruth would often wait by the river, her bare feet sinking into the warm mud, watching the sky burn orange at sunset, waiting for Kofi to come striding through the fields. His arrival was like the turning of the season, inevitable and brimming with life. He would lift her in his strong arms, spin her around until the whole world was just a blur of their laughter. In those stolen moments, they made promises bigger than the sky, deeper than the river, promises only the very young or the very brave dare to make. "Marry me one day, Kofi," Ruth whispered once, her voice trembling not from fear but from the weight of her longing. "There is no other path for me, Ruth," he said, pressing his forehead to hers. "You are my river, my sun, my song." Their love was the envy and amusement of the village. Women shook their heads, men chuckled over palm wine, but none could deny that what Ruth and Kofi shared was real. It burned with the urgency of youth, the desperation of two souls who had found in each other something the world rarely gives. Yet the world, like the river, was always moving. And in the quiet corners of their love, the seeds of sorrow had already begun to root. Ruth's family, though rich in kindness, was poor in worldly possessions. Her father, Mr. Obi, was a farmer whose back was bent from a lifetime of coaxing reluctant crops from stubborn soil. Her mother, Mama Chica, was a seamstress, mending the torn clothes of those who could not afford new ones. They lived day by day, praying for rain, for harvest, for mercy. Education in Oloo was a gift only a few could afford beyond primary school. Ruth was clever, hungry for knowledge, but when the fees for secondary school loomed like a dark cloud, there was no money, no magic, no miracle. "You must understand, my child," Mama Chica said, tears staining her cheeks as she folded Ruth's worn uniform for the last time. "We cannot give you what we do not have." Ruth understood. She understood in the way children of hardship always do, with a tight nod, a silent acceptance, and a heart that bruises but does not break. Opportunity came not with drums and celebrations, but with quiet desperation. Her father's wealthy friend, Chief Okoro, who had long left Oloo for the glittering towers of Ebonu City, sent word that he needed a housemaid. He was a bachelor now, they said, wealthy beyond dreams, with no wife to keep his house or warm his bed. "It is work," Mr. Obi said, his voice heavy. "Not slavery. You will be paid, fed, clothed. And perhaps, you will find your future there." Ruth did not argue. She kissed her mother's hands, hugged her father tightly, and promised Kofi, with tears in her eyes, that no city, no riches, no distance would sever the thread between them. "Wait for me," she whispered against his chest. "I will wait until the stars fall from the sky," Kofi promised, holding her so tightly it hurt. The morning she left Oloo, the village awoke in a strange silence, as if the land itself mourned her departure. She wore a simple dress, carried a small bundle of clothes, and held on to the memories of her love like talismans against the unknown. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification button, so you won't miss out on any of our amazing stories. Back to the story. The bus to Ebonu City coughed and groaned its way along the cracked roads, carrying Ruth farther from the only life she had ever known. Through the rattling windows, she watched the fields and forests give way to strange landscapes, paved roads, towering billboards, endless streams of cars and people moving like blood through the arteries of a giant beast. Ebonu City rose from the earth like a promise and a threat. Glass skyscrapers stabbed the sky, and neon lights burned even in the daylight. The air smelled of fuel, ambition, and 1,000 dreams colliding. Ruth's heart raced. Awe mingled with fear. This was not Oloo. This was a world built on speed, noise, and towering ambition. Yet in the center of it all, she clutched her love for Kofi like a shield. She would not lose herself. She would not forget. Chief Okoro's house was a fortress of stone and glass, perched high in the wealthy hills of Ebonu. Marble floors gleamed underfoot, gold-framed paintings stared down from the walls, and chandeliers poured light like waterfalls from the ceilings. Ruth had never seen such wealth. It pressed down on her like a heavy robe, alien and dazzling. She was shown her tiny room, a corner tucked away near the servants' quarters, modest but clean. Her duties were explained briskly by the head steward. Clean the house, wash the dishes, do the laundry, cook the meals, run errands to the market. It was hard work, endless and exhausting. Her hands, once soft, grew rough and calloused. Yet she worked with a fierce determination, waking before the sun and collapsing into bed long after the city lights had blinked into the darkness. Every month, when her salary was paid, she divided it carefully. A portion for herself, a larger share sent home to Oloo, and a precious amount set aside for Kofi. She sent him little notes with the money, scribbled with love and longing. Soon, my heart, soon we will be together again. In the evenings, when her chores were done, she would sit by her small window, looking at the glittering skyline of Ebonu, dreaming of the day Kofi would join her, when they would build a life amid the tall buildings and bright lights. She imagined him walking beside her through the bustling streets, their hands entwined, their laughter rising above the noise of the city. She did not know that dreams, like glass, can shatter without warning. Chief Okoro, her employer, was a man of quiet power. His wealth came from businesses Ruth did not understand: real estate, oil, politics, they said. He was kind, in the way of a man who had everything and wanted for nothing, and at first, he barely noticed the young maid who moved like a ghost through his house. But in time, he began to see her. To really see her. The way she moved with grace, the way her laughter lit up the kitchen on rare occasions, the way her eyes held a light he thought the city had long extinguished. At first, it was small gestures. A new pair of shoes. An envelope of money slipped onto her bedside table. A soft gaze that lingered longer than it should. Ruth noticed. How could she not? But her heart was tethered to a boy 100 miles away, to promises made under the watchful eyes of the river and the stars. She remained polite, distant, respectful. Chief Okoro's gifts piled up. Dresses, jewelry, even a sleek little phone. But she accepted only what was necessary, returning most with trembling hands. Thank you, sir, but I have all I need. He smiled at her with a sadness she did not understand. Back in Oloo, the seasons turned. The river swelled and shrank. The village danced and mourned and celebrated as villages do. And Kofi, who had once sworn to wait until the stars fell, began to change. At first, it was subtle. Missed letters. Shorter replies. Excuses. Then, the whispers began to reach Ruth's ears through the grapevine of village gossip. Whispers of Kofi seen in the market with a new girl, of him laughing too loudly at the village dances, of him spending money freely, money that smelled suspiciously of the crisp bills Ruth sent from Ebonu. She told herself it was lies. Envy. Malice. She clung tighter to the image of him she carried in her heart, the boy who had promised her forever. But the truth, like a weed, is stubborn. And soon, it would choke everything she believed in. Ebonu City had a way of changing people. Its breath was smoke and ambition, its heartbeat the constant thrum of engines and hurried footsteps. Day after day, Ruth found herself swallowed deeper into its vastness, its chaos, its indifferent pulse. Yet amid it all, she clung to her simple dreams like a fisherman clings to his battered boat in the heart of a storm. Each morning, she woke before the world stirred, slipping into her worn uniform, tying her hair back, and setting about her tasks with silent determination. Chief Okoro's mansion was vast. Floors of marble that demanded endless polishing, curtains so heavy they drank the dust from the air, endless hallways that seemed to lead nowhere. There was always something to clean, something to mend, something to tend. Ruth worked as if every sweep of her broom, every scrub of her cloth, was a prayer offered to the gods for the life she was building, for herself, for Kofi, for the future that shimmered just out of reach. At first, she saved every naira she could spare, sending fat envelopes back to Olo'o. A portion went to her family, for rice, for medicine, for her younger siblings, school fees. The rest, she sent to Kofi. For love, for faith, for the invisible cord tying their hearts across the endless miles. In return, she received letters, sporadic and brief. Thank you, my star. I miss you. Things are well. Soon, we shall be together. They were words that comforted her in the lonely nights when the city roared outside her tiny window, when homesickness sat heavy on her chest like a stone. She would clutch the letters to her heart and whisper to the night, "Hold him for me. Keep him safe." But beneath the sweetness of those words, a sour seed was sprouting. Kofi was changing. In the village, the money Ruth sent made him a small king. Where once he had worn threadbare shirts and worn sandals, he now strutted through the village in new clothes, gold chains glinting at his neck, shoes so polished they caught the sunlight. The girls noticed. They always notice. First it was Ngozi, the baker's daughter, who laughed too loudly at his jokes. Then Ezine, with her quick eyes and quicker hands. Then others, faceless, nameless, always eager, always reaching. At first, Kofi resisted. His heart, somewhere deep, still belonged to Ruth. But temptation in Olo'o was a gentle river that wore away even the strongest stones. She is far away, he reasoned with himself one drunken night, the smell of palm wine thick in the air. A man has needs. It means nothing. It meant everything. Slowly, the letters he sent back to Ebonu grew colder, shorter, rarer. Ruth noticed. She wrote longer letters in return, filling them with dreams and plans, trying to rekindle the flame she could feel slipping through her fingers like river water. When you come to Ebonu, she wrote, we will find a small house. I will cook your favorite meals. We will dance in the streets under the city lights. Just come to me, Kofi. Come to me. He never answered those letters. Instead, her money vanished into nights of laughter, drinks, and bodies that were not hers. Meanwhile, Chief Okoro watched her. At first, it was distant admiration, the kind a man of power has for something pure he believes he cannot touch. But as the weeks turned to months, his gaze grew heavier, lingering longer. He saw her strength, the way she bent under burdens but never broke. He saw her kindness, the way she fed the stray cat that roamed the mansion grounds. He saw her sadness, the way she sometimes stood by the window at night, her shoulders trembling with silent tears. And he wanted her. Not just her body. Though that desire burned hot and urgent, but her soul. Her fire. Her loyalty. He began to court her in the only ways he knew. A silk scarf from a boutique downtown. A basket of rare fruits from the countryside. A gold bracelet that caught the light like a promise. Ruth accepted none of it, save for the fruits, which she divided among the other housemates. I cannot accept, sir, she said each time, bowing her head respectfully. Chief Okoro would smile. That slow, patient smile of a man used to getting what he wanted, and say nothing. But he did not stop. If anything, he tried harder. Her days blurred into one another. Wake, work, send money, cry, hope, pray. But the city had begun to seep into her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to understand things she had not before. The sharpness in people's smiles, the way wealth could twist love, the loneliness that lived behind glass windows and golden gates. She learned how to navigate the crowded markets without fear, how to haggle with sly traders, how to stand a little taller when walking past the leering eyes of strange men. Ebonu City was remaking her, piece by piece. But at her core, she remained the village girl who believed in promises, who believed that love could survive anything. Until the day she learned otherwise. It was Mama Nkechi, a family friend visiting Ebonu, who brought the news. Ruth had just returned from the market, arms laden with groceries, when she saw the familiar figure waiting by the mansion gates. Mama Nkechi, she cried, dropping her bags and running to embrace the older woman. They talked briefly, exchanged stories, laughter, tears. And then, when Ruth least expected it, Mama Nkechi, with her mouth full of pity, said the words that shattered her world. Your Kofi. He has changed, child. Ruth froze. What do you mean? Mama Nkechi sighed, looking away. He drinks. He wastes your money on girls. He says you are a foolish maid in a city that will eat you alive. Ruth felt the earth tilt beneath her feet. No, she whispered. I saw it with my own eyes. Ruth, Mama Nkechi said gently. I saw him with Ezine, laughing like you never existed. They say he boasts that he has fresh girls every week. The words carved wounds into Ruth's heart. Wounds that bled silently, unseen by the bustling city around her. She managed to smile, to thank Mama Nkechi, to say goodbye without falling apart. But that night, in the privacy of her tiny room, she broke. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes burned, until her body was hollow. 7 days. 7 nights. She did not eat. She barely slept. She withered like a flower crushed underfoot. Chief Okoro noticed immediately. He saw how she moved like a ghost through the house, how her eyes had lost their light, how her laugh, once so warm, had become a brittle, foreign sound. He called for the best doctors. Paid for the best medicines. Spared no expense. He would sit by her bedside when she was too weak to stand, reading to her softly from books she could barely understand. Rest, little one, he murmured. You have fought too hard. Let someone fight for you now. And though her heart was broken, though her spirit was drowning, some small part of her heard him. Some small part of her began to believe that perhaps the world still held a sliver of kindness. 6 months passed. Slowly, painfully, Ruth clawed her way back to life. But she was no longer the same girl. The girl who had left Oloa with stars in her eyes was gone. In her place stood a woman carved from grief, anger, and a terrible, blazing clarity. Is love this wicked? She asked herself often, staring at the city lights that once seemed so magical. Is love a lie? No answer came. Only the quiet, steady beating of her own wounded heart. And so, one fateful evening, standing before Chief Okoro with a voice that trembled but did not break, Ruth made a request. Sir, she said, bowing her head, may I take a leave of absence? I wish to return to my village for a time. Chief Okoro's eyes softened. As long as you need, he said without hesitation. Take all the time you require. He handed her a thick envelope of cash, more than her entire year's salary. Go. Find your peace. Ruth took it with shaking hands, murmured her thanks, and packed her few belongings. But she did not leave with the intention of finding peace. No. Ruth was going home for war. A quiet, terrible war that would reshape both her destiny and Kofi's forever. The road to Oloa was long and dusty, winding through fields of tall grasses and sleepy villages that seemed to slumber under the noonday sun. Ruth sat in the back of the rickety old bus, the envelope of money tucked securely into the folds of her dress, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in her chest. The bus jolted and creaked, each bump in the road stirring up old memories. Her barefoot races through the fields with Kofi. The stolen kisses behind the yam barns. The whispered promises under the ancient baobab tree. We will be together forever, Kofi had once sworn, tracing circles into her palm. Ruth clenched her fists, feeling the ghost of that touch and the sting of betrayal it now carried. Forever had been a lie. A sweet, poisonous lie. The village of Oloo had not changed. The same mud brick houses, the same open-air market buzzing with gossip and barter, the same smell of roasting maize and palm oil hanging heavy in the air. Children ran barefoot through the streets, goats bleated in the distance, and the old men sat under the tree by the square, chewing kola nuts and talking politics. To the villagers, Ruth was a curiosity, the girl who had gone to the great city and returned, wrapped in mystery and sorrow. They stared as she passed, whispered behind cupped hands. But Ruth kept her head high, her steps steady. She was no longer the girl who had left with hope in her heart. She was something else now. Something sharper. Something dangerous. Her first stop was her family home, a small, crumbling house at the edge of the village. Her mother wept at the sight of her, cradling her face in calloused hands, murmuring prayers of thanks. Her younger siblings clung to her skirts, wide-eyed and smiling. "My daughter," her father said, pride and worry warring in his voice. "You have grown into a fine woman." Ruth smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "It is good to be home, Papa," she said, setting down her bundle. She shared her money with them generously, seeing the way their faces lit up, the way their shoulders sagged in relief. For a moment, she felt something close to peace. But it was a fleeting thing. A shadow compared to the storm building in her chest. On the third day of her return, she saw him. Kofi. He was leaning against the wall of Mama Obi's tavern, laughing with a group of boys, a bottle of palm wine dangling from his fingers. His once lean frame was now thick with laziness, his eyes bloodshot, his clothes rumpled and stained. And on his lap sat a girl, a pretty, shallow thing named Ngozi, giggling as Kofi whispered something into her ear. Ruth stood frozen in the street, invisible to him, watching as he kissed the girl sloppily, right there in the open. No shame. No guilt. No memory of the promises he had once made. Something inside Ruth cracked. Not loudly, like a shattering plate. But quietly, like the slow, inevitable splintering of ice underfoot. She turned and walked away, her hands trembling, her vision blurring. The days that followed were a nightmare. Everywhere she went, Kofi was there, laughing, drinking, draping his arms around one girl after another. The money she had sent, her sacrifices, her dreams, had fueled his descent into arrogance and waste. She tried to confront him once. Cornered him outside the market, her voice shaking with anger and heartbreak. "Kofi," she said, standing before him, "what have I done to deserve this?" He blinked at her, swaying slightly on his feet. "Ruth," he slurred, "you're a city girl now, Abby. Go back to your big buildings and big men. Leave village boys like me alone." The crowd around them chuckled, cruel and cutting. Ruth felt the heat rise to her face. Shame, fury, sorrow all tangled together. "I gave you everything," she whispered. Kofi shrugged, the motion lazy, dismissive. "I never asked you to." With that, he turned and stumbled away, arm in arm with another girl. And something final, something fatal, snapped inside Ruth. She sought counsel from his parents, the elders who had once blessed their union, smiled upon their love. Surely, they would see the wrongness of Kofi's ways. She knelt before them in the cool, dark interior of their house, her voice breaking as she poured out her heart. But they only exchanged glances and shrugged. "He is a man," his father said simply. "Men will be men," his mother added, sipping her tea. They did not see her pain. Did not see the future she had dreamed of crumbling into dust. In that moment, Ruth understood something deep and terrible. No one was coming to save her. No one cared about the promises broken. In their eyes, her love, her loyalty, her suffering, all were meaningless. She rose slowly to her feet, dusting off her knees with deliberate care. "What must be, she murmured under her breath. And as she stepped back into the sunlight, she knew. She would no longer beg. She would no longer plead. She would create what must be. With her own hands. The plan formed slowly, carefully, like the weaving of a spider's web. Ruth visited the old woman who lived beyond the river, Mama Igioma, known to some as a healer, to others as something far darker. You seek justice? Mama Igioma asked, her eyes milky with age yet sharp as knives. I seek balance, Ruth replied, her voice steady. The old woman chuckled, a sound like dry leaves scraping over stone. Then you must be willing to pay the price, child. Balance demands sacrifice. Ruth nodded. I have already paid with my heart, she said. What more can it take? Mama Igioma gave her a small clay vial, filled with a thick, bitter-smelling liquid. 3 drops, she instructed. Into his drink. No more, no less. He will not die, but he will wish he had. His pride will rot, his strength will waste away. And when the world abandons him, you shall have your justice. Ruth tucked the vial into the folds of her dress and thanked the old woman. The web was spun. Now, it was time to bait the spider. She waited patiently, letting the days drift by, letting Kofi's arrogance swell unchecked. When the time was right, she sent him a message through a young boy. Meet me by the old baobab tree, it read. I have something for you. The fool came, of course. Kofi always came when he thought there was something to be gained. He swaggered up to her beneath the spreading branches of the ancient tree, smirking. Changed your mind, city girl? He taunted. Ruth smiled. A soft, secret smile. I missed you, she said, her voice sweet as honey. She offered him a gourd of palm wine, watching as he drank greedily, not even tasting the bitterness that laced the liquid. When he had drained it dry, she kissed his cheek and walked away. The first step was complete. Now, all she had to do was wait. The symptoms began 3 days later. First, Kofi's speech grew thick and slurred, his tongue refusing to obey. Then, his legs began to tremble, his hands to jerk uncontrollably. By the end of the week, he could barely control his bowels, soiling himself in public, stumbling through the streets as children pointed and laughed. The girls who had once clung to him now crossed the street to avoid him. The friends who had once drunk with him now jeered and spat at his feet. Even his parents turned their faces away, ashamed. In the end, he was left alone, a broken, stinking shadow of the boy he had once been. Exactly as she had planned. Ruth watched from afar, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She felt no joy in his suffering, only a grim satisfaction, a sense of the scales tipping back toward justice. She visited him once, near the end, standing a few feet away as he lay in the dirt outside his family's house, too weak even to lift his head. He wept when he saw her, great heaving sobs that tore from his ruined body. Why? He gasped. Ruth knelt beside him, her voice low and steady. Because I loved you, she said. Because you broke me. Because you made a mockery of my soul. Kofi tried to speak, but only a strangled moan emerged. She rose, brushing dust from her skirt. My vengeance is complete, she said softly. 3 days later, he hung himself from the branch of the very baobab tree where they had once made their promises. The village found his body swaying gently in the breeze, a grim and final apology. Ruth did not cry. She had already shed all her tears. On the 4th day, she packed her things and boarded the bus back to Ebonu City. Chief Akora welcomed her back with open arms and quiet understanding. He did not ask questions. He did not demand answers. He simply gave her space, patience, and kindness. And slowly, painfully, the shattered pieces of Ruth's heart began to fit back together. But they fit differently now. Sharper. Stronger. She was no longer the naive village girl who had believed in forever. She was a woman forged in betrayal and rebirth. And somewhere, deep within her, new feelings began to stir, unexpected, frightening, and undeniable. Feelings not for the boy she had once loved, but for the man who had never abandoned her, even when she was at her most broken. The city's hum was different this time. When Ruth returned to Ebonu City, it no longer felt like an overwhelming force pressing against her chest. No, It buzzed around her like a distant song, a melody she could now walk through without fear. She had been tested by betrayal and had not broken. She had delivered her vengeance and carried the weight of it without collapsing. In a way, she had shed her past like an old, tattered garment. Now, a new life awaited her. Chief Okoro's mansion stood tall and proud on the edge of the city's bustling heart. Glittering windows caught the sunlight, polished marble floors stretched out beneath ornate chandeliers. It could have been intimidating, a palace for kings, not a home for a village girl. But Chief Okoro, for all his wealth and standing, met her at the door himself. No servants, no grand gestures, just a man with kind eyes, opening his home, and perhaps something more, to a girl with battle scars hidden beneath her skin. "Welcome back, Ruth," he said, his voice gentle as rain after a long drought. She bowed slightly, out of habit. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "No need for sir anymore," he smiled, stepping aside to let her in. "You are family here." The words pierced something deep inside her, a tenderness she thought had long since withered. Family. Not servant. Not burden. Family. And for the first time in a long while, Ruth felt herself breathe. The days passed gently. Ruth resumed her duties. Cooking, cleaning, tending to the house. But the energy had changed. Chief Okoro treated her not as a maid but as a companion, an equal. He would sit with her at dinner, asking about her thoughts, her dreams. He would leave books by her bedside. Novels, poetry, tales from faraway lands. When she struggled with the reading, he patiently taught her, guiding her finger under the words until the sentences danced with meaning. "You have a sharp mind," he said one evening, after she flawlessly read a page aloud. All it needed was a little water to bloom. Ruth's cheeks burned with pride. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, like she was more than her body, more than her usefulness. Like she was worthy. The mansion's gardens became her refuge. Each morning, after her chores, she would wander among the flowers, hibiscus and roses, frangipani and bougainvillea, letting the colors and scents wrap around her like a protective cloak. Sometimes, Chief Okoro would find her there, a book in one hand, a thoughtful look on her face. He would smile, sit beside her, and listen to whatever thoughts spilled from her lips, about the story she was reading, about the memories that haunted her, about the dreams she was slowly daring to form again. Never once did he interrupt. Never once did he belittle. He simply listened, absorbing her words as though they were precious jewels. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between words and glances, something delicate began to grow. Not the fevered, reckless love she had once known, but something steadier, something stronger, like a sapling pushing through rocky soil toward the sun. One evening, as the sky melted into a river of oranges and purples, Ruth found herself standing on the balcony, overlooking the city. Chief Okoro joined her, a soft breeze tugging at his linen shirt. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the lights flicker on one by one across the horizon. "You are healing," he said finally. Ruth's throat tightened. "Am I?" she whispered. "Yes," he said. "And you are becoming even more beautiful for it." She turned to him, heart pounding. There was no mockery in his eyes. No selfish hunger. Only warmth. Respect. Affection so deep it made her chest ache. "I thought I would never feel anything again," she confessed, her voice shaking. He smiled, reaching out to gently brush a lock of hair from her forehead. "The heart knows how to mend itself," he said. "It only needs time, and a safe place to heal." Ruth felt tears prick her eyes, but this time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were the tears of a soul that had found shelter after a storm. Their relationship deepened with the seasons. What began as friendship blossomed into something richer, though neither dared to name it yet. There were stolen glances across the dining table, fingers brushing by accident and lingering just a little too long. Laughter shared over private jokes. Companionship that filled the hollow spaces inside them both. Ruth began to bloom. She learned to play the piano, her slender fingers dancing over the keys in clumsy but joyful tunes. She took painting lessons, capturing the city's vibrant life in bold strokes of color. She even began attending evening classes at the local school, determined to finish the education that had once been stolen from her. Through it all, Chief Okoro stood by her side, a steady, unwavering presence. Never pushing, never demanding, only encouraging. One rainy evening, as thunder grumbled low in the distance and rain beat against the windows like 1,000 drumming fingers, everything changed. Ruth was curled up on the couch, reading a book Chief Okoro had given her, a collection of old African folktales. She laughed at a particularly mischievous trickster story, the sound light and musical. Chief Okoro looked up from his work across the room, and for a moment, he simply stared at her. There was something in his gaze, something raw, vulnerable, undeniable. Ruth felt it like a pull in her chest, a magnetic force drawing her toward him. Slowly, without thinking, she set the book aside and crossed the room. Chief Okoro rose to meet her, his movements just as slow, just as hesitant. They stood there, inches apart, the storm raging outside and inside. Ruth, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. If I am wrong, if I have misread your heart, tell me now, and I will never cross this line. Ruth looked up at him, at the man who had seen her broken and still chosen her. At the man who had loved her not despite her scars, but because of them. And she smiled, a trembling, radiant smile. Without a word, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not desperate or hungry. It was gentle, healing, a promise sealed in the soft clash of lips and the mingling of breath. When they finally pulled apart, Chief Okoro cupped her face in his hands, resting his forehead against hers. You are my blessing, he murmured. My second chance at happiness. Ruth closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words seep into the deepest cracks of her soul. And you are mine, she whispered back. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the walls of Chief Okoro's home, and within the hearts of two battered souls, a new kind of love took root. A love not built on youthful naivety or reckless promises, but on patience, respect, resilience. A love that would weather any storm. The weeks after their confession were like living in a dream woven from silk and gold. Ruth and Chief Okoro moved through the days wrapped in a quiet joy. No grand declarations, no noisy promises. Their love was steady, sure, a river cutting its way through stone, soft but unstoppable. But in life, even the calmest waters eventually meet a storm. And Ruth's storm came when she least expected it. It began with a letter. A simple envelope, slipped under the grand front door by a hand too cowardly to knock. Ruth found it early one morning, the paper damp from dew, the ink smudged slightly. She hesitated before picking it up, a knot forming in her stomach as though her spirit already knew trouble had arrived. The letter smelled faintly of home, of the village roads, the dust, the old sorrows she had left behind. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the note. Ruth, I know I wronged you. But I have changed. I am sick. I have no one. I beg you to come back. Only you can save me. Abina. Abina. The name felt like a stone hurled through a fragile window inside her chest. For a long moment, she simply stared at the words. Memories she had buried clawed their way to the surface. His laughter as he charmed other women. Her tears soaking her pillow each night. The hollow, broken thing she had become because of him. The vengeance she had wrought with her own hands. And yet, even after all the pain, there was still a small voice inside her, foolish, stubborn, that remembered loving him once. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She needed to think. Chief Okoro noticed her distraction immediately. That evening, as they sat in the garden under a sky blanketed with stars, he reached for her hand across the small table. Ruth, he said softly, your eyes are far away tonight. What troubles you? For a moment, she debated lying. Pretending. Shielding him from her turmoil. But love demanded honesty. So she told him. Everything. The letter. The sickness. The way it twisted her insides with guilt and rage and sorrow. Chief Okoro listened without interrupting, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. When she finished, she looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. What should I do? She whispered. He was silent for a long time, his gaze steady and thoughtful. Finally, he said, you must do what brings you peace, Ruth. Not what others expect. Not what guilt demands. Only what will allow your soul to breathe freely again. But what if seeing him undoes everything I've built? Chief Okoro's hand tightened slightly on hers. Then I will be here to help you rebuild, he said simply. The tears finally fell then. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was not alone anymore. She had someone who would walk through the fire with her. Someone who would stay. The next morning, Ruth boarded a rickety bus bound for the village. The journey was rough. Potholes jolting the vehicle, dust choking the air, but she barely noticed. Her mind was a storm of memories and fears, swirling too fast for her to catch. When the bus finally rolled into the familiar dusty square of her childhood home, Ruth felt her stomach twist. The village had not changed much. The same mud huts leaning against each other like old friends. The same group of children chasing chickens through the alleyways. The same old women gossiping under the ancient baobab tree. But Ruth had changed. She felt it in the way she stood taller, walked stronger. She was not the broken girl who had fled in tears. She was something new now. Something forged in pain and tempered in love. Finding Ebonu was easy. He was exactly where the villagers whispered he would be, lying on a straw mat under the crumbling roof of his parents' abandoned house. The stench hit her first. The smell of unwashed flesh, sickness, and despair. Then the sight. Ebonu, once so proud and handsome, reduced to a shell. His clothes hung from his thin frame. His hair was matted, his eyes glassy. A bucket sat beside him, half filled with vomit. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, hope. Shame. Ruth, he croaked, reaching out a skeletal hand. Ruth stopped a few feet away, her arms folded tightly across her chest. You summoned me, she said, her voice colder than she intended. Ebonu coughed, a wet, ragged sound. I have no one, he rasped. They all left. The women. My friends. Even my parents. Ruth's heart twisted painfully. Not with love, but with a deep, aching pity. And now you remember me? She asked, bitterness creeping into her voice. Ebonu let out a broken laugh that turned into another cough. You were the only one who ever loved me, he said. And I destroyed it. There it was, the confession she had once wept for. The apology she had dreamed of. But now, standing here, it felt hollow. Too little. Too late. Ruth knelt beside him, careful not to touch. Why call me, Ebonu? She asked quietly. After everything. Tears welled in his bloodshot eyes. Because I am dying, he whispered. And I cannot die with this burden on my soul. Ruth closed her eyes, feeling the heavy weight of the moment press down on her. She thought of the nights she had cried for him. The months she had wasted. The part of herself she had lost. And the part she had rebuilt. And then she opened her eyes and looked him full in the face. I forgive you, she said. Ebonu sobbed then. Loud, wrenching sounds that tore through the empty house. Ruth stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. I forgive you, she repeated. But I will not save you. That is your journey now. She turned and walked away, her steps steady, her heart light. Behind her, the village faded into the distance, swallowed by the rising dust. Ahead of her, Ebonu City waited, a place of second chances, of healing, of love. Of Chief Okoro. When Ruth returned to the mansion, Chief Okoro was waiting at the gate. He said nothing, just opened his arms. Ruth ran to him, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of home. It's done, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head, holding her close. Welcome home, my love, he said. And this time, Ruth knew, it truly was home. The sun hung low over Ebonu City, casting a soft golden glow across the mansion grounds. Ruth stood at the balcony, her hands resting lightly on the marble railing, watching the city below come alive with the colors of evening, crimson skies, amber lights flickering on like tiny stars. It had been 3 months since she returned from the village. 3 months of healing. 3 months of rediscovering joy. 3 months of building a future that once seemed impossible. And at the center of it all was Chief Okoro. Their love, once tentative and careful, had blossomed into something deep and enduring. It was not the wild, reckless fire she had once known with Abina. It was steadier, stronger, a fire that warmed rather than consumed. Chief Okoro loved her with a patience that soothed the jagged edges of her soul. He listened without judgment, celebrated her small victories, and stood silently with her through the moments of lingering sorrow. Together, they built a rhythm, small rituals that stitched their lives together. Late night walks through the mansion gardens. Early morning coffee shared on the back patio. Quiet evenings spent reading side by side, the silence between them as comfortable as an old sweater. It was a new kind of love. A lasting kind. One evening, as they sat beneath the great baobab tree that dominated the mansion's rear garden, Chief Okoro reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Ruth's heart skipped a beat. He opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring, simple but stunning, with a single, luminous diamond at its center. Ruth, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you have been the light that guided me out of loneliness. The soul that healed my broken heart. I don't want to spend another day without you. He knelt. A powerful man brought humbly to his knees by love. Will you marry me? He asked, his eyes searching hers, vulnerable and hopeful. Tears welled up in Ruth's eyes, blurring her vision. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. How far she had come. How deeply she had changed. How blessed she was to be loved like this. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Chief Okoro slipped the ring onto her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms. Around them, the night bloomed with the sound of crickets and the soft rush of the wind through the trees. The world, in that moment, was perfect. The wedding was a grand affair, held 2 months later. The mansion was transformed into a garden of white flowers and golden lights. Guests poured in, family, friends, city officials, even some of Ruth's old neighbors from the village who came bearing wide eyes and humble gifts. Ruth wore a gown of ivory lace that shimmered like morning mist. Chief Okoro stood tall beside her, regal in a deep blue agbada embroidered with gold thread. As she walked down the aisle, Ruth felt her heart swell almost painfully. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with joy so immense it almost knocked the breath from her lungs. She caught glimpses of the life she had left behind, the dusty village roads, the tears, the betrayals. They no longer hurt. They were simply stepping stones that had brought her here, to this sacred moment. When she reached Chief Okoro, he took her hands in his touch steady and sure. Today, the officiant intoned, we join two souls in eternal partnership. As they exchanged vows, Ruth's voice shook with emotion. I vow to stand by you, to build with you, to dream with you, she said. To love you not just when life is easy, but when it is hard. When the storms come and the winds rage, I will be your shelter, as you have been mine. Chief Okoro's eyes shone with unshed tears. And I vow, he said, to cherish you, to honor the strength and beauty you carry. To be your home, your protector, your partner in all things. I am yours, Ruth, in this life and beyond. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, Chief Okoro swept her into a kiss that was tender and fierce all at once. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Ruth heard nothing but the pounding of her heart, the joyful anthem of a soul finally, gloriously, at peace. Their honeymoon took them to faraway lands Ruth had only ever dreamed of. They walked hand in hand along white sandy beaches. They wandered through bustling city streets under foreign skies. They danced under the stars, laughed until their ribs ached, and made love with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was during one such night, lying tangled in silk sheets, that Ruth whispered, "I never thought happiness like this was meant for someone like me." Chief Okoro pulled her closer, his voice rough with feeling. "You were always meant for it, Ruth. You just had to find the right person to share it with." Years passed, and their love only grew stronger. Ruth opened a small charity in Ebonu City, helping young girls from poor villages find education and employment. She named it the Phoenix Foundation, for she, too, had risen from ashes to soar. Chief Okoro supported her dreams fiercely, always cheering the loudest at her successes. And when they welcomed a daughter into the world, a bright-eyed girl with Ruth's spirit and her father's wisdom, they named her Chidima, meaning, God is good. For indeed, life had been good to them, not because it had been easy, but because they had fought, endured, and risen together. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Ruth would sit by the window and think of the girl she once was, standing at the edge of the village road, heart in pieces, future uncertain. She would smile, a deep, knowing smile. "Thank you," she would whisper to the winds, to the gods, to the universe itself. "For breaking me, so I could be remade." And outside, the world would hum with the endless, beautiful song of beginnings. This is the end of the story. Every story holds a seed of wisdom, and with each story, we grow a little deeper into the roots of our culture. If today's tale sparked a thought or touched your spirit, don't just keep it to yourself, share it. Let the story travel. Hit that subscribe button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let me know which lesson stood out to you. I'm Big Mark, keeping the fire of storytelling burning bright. Until the next tale, stay wise, stay proud, and keep listening.